Welcome to The Virtual Shift, a show looking at the seismic changes happening in healthcare with virtual care at the epicenter. Join me and my guests as we look at key cultural and policy shifts impacting how providers, payers, and patients connect, as well as how care is being reimagined both for today and the future. Hello, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm your host, Tom Foley. You can learn more about this show by visiting the program on healthcarenowradio.com, and be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter at FoleyTom, and the hashtag The Virtual Shift. Today we have a great guest, Paul Mango. He's the former Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy in the Trump administration. He just recently released a book called Warp Speed, Inside the Operations That Beat COVID, the Critics and the Odds. And it's a great book. I encourage everyone to go and read it. The foreword is written by Senator Tom Cotton. Paul, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, Paul, the ultimate response to in the Trump administration relative to the pandemic, I thought was personally outstanding. And there were three pillars that I think differentiated our ability to respond. The first and foremost was really our frontline workers. And I've had people that passed due to COVID, and the frontline workers did obviously an outstanding job of being our frontline defense on all this, and they put their own health at risk. The second one was really around the policy and CMS administration, Seema Verma, without her leadership in changing what we reimbursed to maximize access to care, which created the virtual health has been around for years, but it really brought telehealth and virtual care to the front line to ultimately maximize access for those that didn't have COVID or thought they might have COVID, but they ultimately needed access, continue to talk to their doctor. And last but not least, the third element is Operation Warp Speed, which we'll talk about more in this discussion. Any thoughts on those 3 points?
I think those are great points, Tom, and I would like to just say a few words about the first one. I know we're going to talk a lot about Operation Warp Speed, but in the early days of the pandemic, we had care providers almost every evening on the phone, folks from Seattle, if you remember the early days, Northern California, then Mount Sinai, those who were actually caring for COVID patients. And we would invite through the American Hospital Association anyone who wanted to listen in on those. And what they were learning in real time was extraordinary. And the adaptability of our provider system, and particularly our frontline healthcare workers, led over 6 months to a 80% reduction in the case fatality rate for COVID, an 80% reduction in every age group, because Deb Burks used to keep track of all these data and share them with us. It was extraordinary, but I think the most extraordinary thing about our frontline healthcare workers, and I celebrate and applaud them, is their resilience. I don't know how they've done it for 2 years now. I just don't know how they go into work every day and they do it, but God bless them. And they were such a huge part of our overall response. They have saved at least as many lives as Operation Warp Speed has, I have to say that.
Yeah, I would agree. I have several nieces, sister-in-law, and couple sister-in-laws that EMS and across the healthcare spectrum. So the stories that you hear about the heroism and just their overall experience is a book in and of itself. But so let's talk about Operation Warp Speed. And before we get into the details here, I just want to remind the audience about the challenge associated with, or a challenge by the pharmaceutical organization, Biopharma, to bring a drug to market. It takes about 10 years from drug discovery to the time you can actually put that pill in your mouth. As well, the average cost is just over $950 million. But the total cost ranges from somewhere in the 350 million to 2.8 billion to bring a pharmaceutical drug to market. Again, all spent over a 10-year period. So that's we need to put that in context of Then now let's talk about Operation Warp Speed and what they did in such a very short period of time. And now we all continue to rely on the results of Operation Warp Speed to get control of every variant that has come before us since the initial pandemic. So tell us a little bit about Operation Warp Speed. How did it start, and go from there?
Yeah, and I think you're raising a lot of good points about the economics of the pharmaceutical industry. And just to address, what you mentioned, we spent about $2.5 billion per vaccine candidate. We had 6 vaccine candidates at the start. 3 of them have been wildly successful. 1 or 2 of them dropped out, and 1 we're still waiting on. But I want to make an important point here. The mindset that we took and the mindset that Dr. Monsef Slaoui took, who was our chief scientific advisor, who had brought 14 successful vaccines to market over 30 years, the most successful vaccine developer in the world, by the way. He took a venture capital mindset. We invested $2.5 billion in each of 6 vaccines. We only needed 1 to hit out of those 6, and we got 3. We didn't know in July and August when we were making these investments which ones were going to be passed, getting that EUA, and which ones weren't. But anyway, so the economics are very similar to what you talked about. The differences, though, are pretty stark, and that is drug development typically happens in a series of activities, and you get through one gate, and then you plan for and you execute the next gate, and then you get to the next gate. That could be clinical trials. Most manufacturers wait until they get FDA approval before they start manufacturing anything at scale. And then they think about sales, marketing, and distribution after that, right? So we did all of that in parallel. The federal government assumed the financial risk of manufacturing tens of millions of doses of vaccine before we knew whether we'd ever get FDA approval. We set up a distribution system with over 50,000 outlets. We organized McKesson, we organized UPS, we organized FedEx to get all of those vaccines into people's arms. Because as Peter Marks said earlier, Peter Marks is the head of the Center for Biomedical Evaluation and Research, CBER, which is the organization that approves the vaccines. He said on multiple occasions, getting an EUA is not the end, it's not the beginning of the end, it's the end of the beginning. What we really have to do is get these things distributed to 330 million Americans, get them administered as well, and then monitor afterwards for safety, right? So a very interesting perspective. And the reason I say that is all of these things, research, development, manufacturing, distribution, were happening in parallel, so that when we got an EUA, on day, General Gus Perna made the pledge, within 24 hours of the time we get an emergency use authorization, we will be shipping vaccines. That happened. In fact, we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary. The FDA approved the first vaccine, authorized it, on December 11th, 2020. That's only a couple days away. On December 12th, those doses were moving from factory to UPS and FedEx hubs. On December 13th, they were being shipped to thousands of locations around the country. On December 14th, Americans were being vaccinated. So that was the key to the success of the speed of Operation Warp Speed, was to take everything that used to be done in series and doing it in parallel.
What other keys of success would you identify in the context of how you were able to achieve such a monumental task? Again, this is never a public-private partnership, never really been accomplished before. The federal government was our investor and assumed all the risks. But what would you name? What would be some of the key points of success?
Well, it starts with something that you alluded to at the beginning, and that is the mRNA technology had been under development for over a decade. It was somewhat serendipitous that it could be applied immediately to vaccine development. So the DNA sequence of the COVID-19 virus was released on January 10th, 2020 by a Chinese and an Australian doctor. It was posted on a website. 10 days later, we had a good vaccine. We just didn't know it. Moderna had a good vaccine before the end of January. Okay. Of course, it had to go through all the trials. We had to manufacture it at scale, all that stuff. But that's how quickly that technology permitted us to develop a vaccine. So that was one of the keys to success for sure. I mentioned a couple of the others that the federal government assumed risk that companies like Moderna would never assume, and that is invest billions of dollars in manufacturing and distribution before we knew it was going to be a good or not a good vaccine. So that was important. I mentioned the venture capital mindset. We only needed one to win. Secretary Steve Mnuchin came over and talked to the Secretary Azar and said, we are losing $6 to $7 billion a day in federal revenue, tax revenue, for every day the economy is running at half speed. If you
What
guys,
was that number again?
$6 to $7 billion a day.
$6 to $7 billion a day.
So the vaccine part of Operation Warp Speed, if you count distribution, if you count giving, that we waived all copays and deductibles, we paid for Medicare, it was $30 billion. That's what it is. Okay. 2.5 for each of the 6 vaccines, you get to 15, but there's also a lot of other costs. So the return on investment to the United States economy was 4 days. It took 4 days. So as long as we shaved off, 4 days to a week of the time that the economy could open up again, we would have had a return on investment. Now, most experts say we shaved 18 months or 2 years or 3 years off of that, right? So it's almost infinite. So that was important. Another key to success, little known, it's in the book, but a little known part of it is we set up a governance structure that reported directly to the President of the United States. Okay. So in a major bureaucracy like the federal government, you can also often get bogged down in everyone having to have a say in this and that and everything else.
I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So we knew so much was at stake with hundreds of people, in some cases thousands of Americans dying a day, that we could not afford to engage with the full bureaucracy. So Donald Trump, through Jared Kushner, set up a governance structure where we could go, when we needed a big decision made, we were in the Oval Office within hours and the decision was made and we moved on. So that was also a very important key to success. And then I think there was just what I would call a general philosophy about the private sector. And we had a couple of principles. One was the federal government should never engage in anything that the private sector can do better. Okay. And I wrote this in the book, but with very few exceptions, not a single federal government employee touched a single dose of vaccine before it got into the arms of Americans. Okay. That just tells you. So you have manufacturers that are independent. You had warehousers like, McKesson. You had UPS, you had FedEx, you had CVS, you had Walgreens, you had Walmart. We didn't touch a dose of vaccine. It just gives you a sense for our role, which was to enable the private sector. The private sector delivered the success. So it's kind of a philosophical issue of the government isn't better than Americans, the large private companies in America that have innovated and can innovate and are very adaptive. So that helped us a lot.
Well, if there was ever a demonstration of how the government works for the people, I would say that is the number one demonstration. There are many others. I shouldn't say number one, but it is a top 5 only because I know the government has served and protect us at all times. So I'm sure that there are other things that we don't know about. So not to get philosophical there, but certainly in today's modern age, doing what they did and realizing, I would say, checking the ego at the door, in that it's not all about what government can do. It's about how government can lead, and engaging the private sector to do that is just, again, a demonstration of who we are and who we can be. So, what would you say you learned? Obviously, nothing's perfect, but but I'm sure along the way, and the fact that you're making some critical decisions on the go, I'm sure we learned a couple of things. So, any insights as to what things that we learned in this process?
Yeah, absolutely. But I just want to make a follow-up comment to your point about leadership. And a very wise person told me years ago, leadership's not about being on top, it's about being out in front. And there's a metaphorical difference to those two if you just think about it, right? And I think in the case of how we thought about our role in Operation Warp Speed. It's not that we're the big federal government telling you what to do. It's we are the government who's trying to anticipate what will be needed and helping you as the private sector get there. So we were out in front. We weren't on top. And I think that's a big difference. But what we learn, and I think any executive that's trying to engage in a major transformation will understand and appreciate these things and resonate with them. But one is you have to have a team. You have to not just acquire talent, but you have to forge them into a team. And I talk about this in the book, but there couldn't be two different persons in all of Washington, D.C. in 2020 than Dr. Monsef Slaoui and General Gus Perna, right? I mean, Monsef was born in Morocco, educated in Europe, very, kind of European, genteel individual. And you had Gus Perna, who's a street fighting general from New Jersey. But they got along famously. Those two men were unbelievable. They were selfless, absolutely selfless, egoless leaders. So it was a team, and those two forged a team. Very, very important. I think articulating a clear and compelling vision for what you're trying to do. You could have asked any person. There's hundreds of military and civilian folks on the Operation Warp Speed team. You could have asked any one of them at any time, what are you trying to do? And they would have said, we want to deliver safe and effective vaccines manufactured at scale to the American people before the end of the year. That's what they would have said. Everyone on the team understood that was the mission. And when people understand that, you don't have to manage them. They know what to do every day. They know what to do every minute of every day. I think the third thing we talked about just a moment ago, but we call it obeying the laws of comparative advantage. And economists have a very sophisticated definition of what is the law of comparative advantage, but I kind of hijacked it, and I'm not using it for the same purposes. But what that means is never let the federal government's reach exceed its grasp. Okay, don't let the federal government get into things it knows nothing about. Let the experts do that. Let UPS ship this stuff. Let FedEx do it. They do it every day. I'll tell you a story. We had a vaccine distribution summit on December 8th at the South Auditorium of the White House. President Trump kicked it off and so forth. You can still view the whole thing on YouTube if you have 3.5 hours at your disposal. But one of the questions, the UPS and FedEx guys were there, and one of the questions from the audience was, this was December 8th, right? One of the questions was, guys, we're getting into the holiday, package shipping season. How are you going to handle all these vaccines that you have to send out? Now, we're talking about 1,000 packages a week is all we needed them to do, okay? The UPS guy stood up and said, well, let me look here. He looks at his iPhone. He goes, well, we delivered 34 million packages yesterday. So he said, I don't think 1,000 is going to make a difference. And then the FedEx guy, I mean, this is what makes you proud to be American. The FedEx guy stood up and said, we have retrained every one of our drivers that will be handling vaccines, because we had a rule that you could never drop off the package without human to human contact. So you don't drop it at the back of the CVS. You wait until someone takes it from you and signs for it, okay?
Right.
They retrain thousands of drivers just for Operation Warp Speed. But anyway, the point is, never let the government's reach exceed its grasp and the laws of comparative advantage. And then I talk about in the book about, again, this is a corporate term, but a skunk work is a small group of multidisciplinary folks who are off on their own trying to innovate, and you protect them. You give them the resources they need. You protect them. You do not micromanage them. And that's exactly what Operation Warp Speed was. We put a group of multidisciplinary experts together, from the president to Secretary Azar on down. No one micromanaged them. Our role, President Alex Azar, Paul Mango, was to give that team what they needed to be successful, and they delivered. So those were lessons learned. Again, if you're a CEO at J.P. Morgan or Johnson & Johnson, these things sound familiar to you. They were completely alien to the federal government.
Interesting. So you said earlier it was sometime in January, later January, when we knew we had a vaccine, but it was early December that we actually had it being distributed through the great companies of FedEx and McKesson and UPS. Having been a former UPSer, I'm proud to hear that. But the point there being is 10 months We went from 10 years to 10 months.
Yeah.
To get a solution that was so desperately needed. Otherwise, to your point, financially, our economy could have been in very narrow straits, considering what we were losing on a day-to-day basis.
And a lot more fatalities. A lot more
fatality. Yeah. Geez, how
Yeah.
can I forget that? Absolutely. So, would you have done anything different with the success that you had? Would you have done anything different?
We took the time. We were criticized for doing this, but on January 7th, 2021, right before we left, Secretary Azar gathered the team and took us out to Camp David for the explicit purpose of spending 4 hours to answer that question, right? What would we have done differently if we could do this all over again? And the chief topic that surfaced was one of vaccine hesitancy, and we're still struggling with that as a country. We were given a large sum of money, $300 million, in the summer of 2020 to begin addressing vaccine hesitancy through advertising and communicating with the American people. And we hesitated for two reasons. One is we were fearful of the fact that we could get the population extremely excited about getting vaccinated and then come up short and not have a vaccine. That would have been terrible. The second reason was we knew even in the summer, and we were highly confident we'd have a good vaccine, but we wouldn't have 330 million doses. We'd only have 15 or 20 million doses. So even if we got everyone all lathered up about going out and getting a vaccine, and we had 2 of them approved, as we did, we didn't have enough doses to give to everyone. So we thought that would create frustration. In retrospect, I think we could have been a little bit more savvy about that piece. I think the second one is something that a lesson for the federal government, and I hope they take it to heart, and that is its social media presence is horrendous. Okay, if you think about vaccine hesitancy, most of it was playing out on social media. I mean, I have 5 kids, none of them has a television. Okay, I don't know about your kids, Tom. A lot of people don't, so Deb Burks or Tony Fauci or Joe Biden or Donald Trump, whoever stands up there at the podium and says, get your vaccine, is that the way you communicate with the American people? When I was at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, we have 60 million beneficiaries, mainly seniors, as you know. And the social media platform most popular with seniors is Facebook. We had 400,000 followers. Less than 1% of our beneficiaries were following us. I'm just pointing that out as the federal government has not invested in its social media presence, and therefore our ability to communicate as a federal government to the American people during a pandemic quickly, effectively, consistently was very poor. So I think we would do that over again. But beyond that, I think if I just say a third one, and we're acting on it, I know President Biden's acting on it, President Trump was acting on it. We had zero excess manufacturing capacity for vaccines in the United States in March of 2020. Zero. Okay. We had to expand or stand up from scratch 27 manufacturing facilities. And it's not just the vaccines themselves. It's what they call the fill finishing plants. How do you get the vials filled? How do you get the vials manufactured? It's all the supply chain. We hear a lot about supply chain. We were extraordinarily vulnerable. And we had a guy, Carlo De Natari Stefani, who was a manufacturing expert from the industry, who came in to help us do all that. But we did it on a scramble. We should never have to do that again. All right. So those are, 3 things that I hope for pandemic preparedness next time around. We're ready. It's the product of 2020 hindsight, obviously now, but hopefully future administrations can take that forward. And I talk about all that in the book. So it's memorialized. So that's whoever wants to read it when they're in the middle of the next pandemic, they have some lessons learned.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing about selling the need. I'm in sales, and I always tell my team stop selling because people don't like to get sold to, right? Yeah. I want to know. I want to communicate what's the value of what you're asking. Why are you communicating to me this? Get your vaccine, and what's the value of that to me as an individual and to the rest of the community? I'll just get. I don't want to get too political here, but it's the same idea with the mask, right? To me, wear the damn thing. It doesn't hurt. Just wear the damn thing, and because it protects the projection of what might be in your own body. It's the risks and rewards have some favor. So, in closing, where can we get the book? What would you say in closing, and then tell us where we can get the book.
Yeah, I would say in closing, and this is actually the way I close the book, is what a great example of American exceptionalism, right? So we are in a time of great political strife, division, intolerance. We've been through these types of things before. I was a young college student in the late 70s. You were, post-Vietnam and Watergate and failed Iran hostage, rescue. And we're kind of in that period again, but this is a shining example of how a relatively small group of patriotic Americans came together and made a huge difference. So I think what we want people to understand is this was an American achievement more than anything else. It was nothing to do with politics. It was an American achievement, and people should be proud. The book is on Amazon on a pre-order. It takes, I went to the printer last week. It takes about 75 days to get it fully printed, and then it gets into the warehouses. So people can go pre-order it now. I did see that Amazon put a little banner up there that said the number one bestseller for the category of history of medicine this week. It's already a bestseller. It's a very small category, history of medicine, but hey, it's not bad being a big fish in a small pond. But yeah, you can go to Amazon and order it now, and maybe get it for some of your loved ones as a Christmas gift, and give them a card as a proxy and tell them it'll be arriving in early March.
Well, great suggestion. So, Paul, thank you. Not only a great book, but leadership counts, and it is to be involved. I would think, from your perspective, in one of the most successful achievements in the U.S. history is because, again, it saved so many lives, and it saved an economy and the financial lives of so many. So it just can't speak enough about the effort there. Again, not discarding the primary work of our frontline workers to boot. So with that, I want to thank you for coming on this program and sharing your insights to such an awesome task and an awesome achievement. So thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Tom, and thanks for doing what you're doing for all our healthcare workers.
I would like to thank the show sponsors, both HP and Intel. HP Engage long lifecycle products provide the stability, safety, and security you need, plus flexibility and performance designed for today and tomorrow. As well, Intel would like you to know we're going above and beyond together with new standards for business with the latest Intel vPro processors, delivering what IT needs for performance, security, remote manageability, and stability. And be sure to check out the program page on healthcarenowradio.com. And remember, connect or follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter @FoleyTom, and follow the show's hashtag, The Virtual Shift. I'm Tom Foley. Until the next shift.